All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to embark on an absolutely massive 600 million year journey. We're looking at the vast, sweeping history of animal life on Earth. But more specifically, we're going to trace the shifting, complex, and honestly, sometimes paradoxical relationship between humans and the animal world. From our shared microscopic beginnings all the way to the modern philosophical movements that are completely reshaping how we view our fellow creatures, there is just a ton of ground to cover today. So let's get into it. It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? Have we totally forgotten what animals really are? Well, as we go through the sources today, we're going to see that our relationship with animals hasn't exactly been a straight line. It has drastically transformed over time. Depending on the era, human societies have viewed animals as ancestors, as equals, as divine beings, as property, and even as machines. And to understand where we are right now, we really have to understand how we got here. Chapter 1: The Dawn of Animal Life. To really wrap our heads around this journey, we have to shift our perspective deep, deep into the past and look at the origins of the very first multicellular organisms. According to the fossil record, around 609 million years ago, we see these mysterious fossilized balls of cells, literally the oldest known animal embryos. Then we jump forward to 538 million years ago, and boom, we hit the Cambrian explosion. This was a sudden, massive burst of evolutionary diversity where complex life forms rapidly began to populate the oceans. It's like a biological Big Bang. That massive explosion of life set the biological foundation for every single animal that would ever walk, swim, or fly on Earth. We all share this awe-inspiring, deep time origin story. But as humans eventually evolved and started forming complex societies, how did we actually begin relating to the rest of the animal kingdom?
That brings us to Chapter 2, Ancient Art and Animal Persons.
Let's explore how early hunter-gatherers viewed their animal counterparts. They didn't just see them as neighbors, they saw them as entirely distinct subjects. Deep in a cave on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, archaeologists found a painting dating back at least 45,500 years. It depicts the Sulawesi warty pig, which is this 40 to 85 kilogram wild boar endemic to the island. And what is so profound about this is that it represents the oldest known depiction of the animal world, and possibly the earliest figurative art ever created by humans. From our absolute earliest days of self-expression, animals were our primary subjects. Now, there is a stark contrast between our modern view and our ancient heritage. In modern Western societies, we often have this utilitarian view, treating animals primarily as objects, as commodities, resources, or property. But the archaeological research shows that ancient hunting and gathering societies operated on what scholars call relational ontologies. In their worldview, the boundary between nature and culture was incredibly fluid. Animals weren't just resources, they were considered animal persons, vested with their own sentience, agency, and social identity. And we have literal physical proof of this deep respect. In these fascinating archaeological sites near Lake Baikal in southern Siberia, dating back 7,000 to 8,000 years, we see this relationship so clearly. In the Shamanka cemetery, a dog was regularly provisioned, lived a long life, and was then buried alongside 5 humans. Even more incredibly, the Lokomota's wolf was buried with ochre, a pigment traditionally used in human rituals, and a human head. I mean, wow. Later, in Pazyryk, 10 horses were buried with immense dignity. These burials prove that early humans treated individual animals as unique subjects. They honored their life histories and death just as they would a human being. Moving on to Chapter 3, Domestication and Veterinary Medicine. As humans started settling down to farm, a massive philosophical shift occurred. We went from seeing animals as persons to treating them primarily as property. Tracing this timeline is just incredible. Domestication started with dogs at least 10,000 years ago, used initially by hunter-gatherers as essentially prehistoric alarm systems to warn of danger. Then, by the 4th millennium BC in ancient Egypt and India, we start seeing the first recorded medical treatments of domestic animals. By the 1st century BC, the Roman writer Columella uses the term veterinaeus, meaning the care of livestock, and professionalization really takes off when the very first veterinary school opens in Lyon, France in 1761. In ancient Babylon, the care for domestic animals was surprisingly holistic. They used massaging, healing compresses, elaborate washing routines, and various therapeutic oils. Who knew ancient Babylonians were essentially running animal day spas? It's fascinating. They clearly possessed a deep, empirical knowledge of how to care for animal bodies. So, the crucial point to take away here is that while this medical care was highly developed, the underlying motive had fundamentally changed. Society began placing animals lower on a rigid hierarchy known as the Great Chain of Being, a worldview that positioned humans high above all other earthly life. Animals were kept healthy simply because they were now valuable currency, beasts of burden, and a vital food source. That relational bond of the early hunter-gatherer had been almost entirely replaced by a utilitarian need to protect an investment.
Chapter 4: The Era of Industrial Exploitation.
Hit pause for a second and really think about this number. The sources highlight a pretty stark reality of our modern era. Back in the year 1800, it took a farmed pig between 2 to 5 years to reach a weight of 60 kilograms. Today, modern breeding and mechanization have accelerated that process so intensely that a pig reaches 100 kilograms in just 6 months. 6 months. The research describes this intense acceleration as a form of chrononormative violence. Farmed animals today are severely alienated from their natural biological rhythms. They're pushed to meet human expectations of bodily productivity, resulting in lifespans that are so artificially shortened, many of them are slaughtered before they've even lost their baby teeth. And this extreme alienation takes a severe psychological toll. The sources share this heartbreaking observation by animal welfare scientist Françoise Wiemelsfelder. She observed a young female pig housed entirely alone in a barren pen. The natural, intelligent, alert responsiveness of the animal was completely gone, replaced by a deep withdrawal. It's a really poignant illustration of the lowest points of the modern animal condition under these massive industrial systems. Which leads us to Chapter 5, The Modern Animal Turn. Fortunately, society, culture, and academia are currently waking up to these realities in what is being called the animal turn. This interdisciplinary movement fundamentally challenges our human-centric worldview. It moves way beyond just studying animals as metaphors or symbols in literature and art, and insists that we look at their actual lived conditions. It's about recognizing that animals are sentient subjects, and it critically questions the systemic exploitation of all life forms. Consider this incredibly powerful image by artist Julia Lindemal. A person is kneeling down, staring at a dolphin through a thick pane of glass. It is just a brilliant visual metaphor. It perfectly captures both our deep, innate desire to connect with the animal world and the artificial, sterile barriers we've constructed that keep us totally separate from them. So, what exactly is the path forward according to this movement? Well, the animal turn suggests a few absolutely crucial steps. First, we must legally and culturally acknowledge animal sentience. Second, it calls for us to actively reject the strict commodification and factory exploitation of animal bodies. And third, it asks us to cultivate an ethics of care, to remember that ancient mutual dependency and recognize our shared situatedness on this planet.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question to reflect on. How will we build an ethically sustainable future with our fellow species? From ancient cave art to modern industrialized farms, our journey with animals is really the story of ourselves. As the animal turn suggests, creating a sustainable future might just require us to remember what our ancient ancestors knew thousands of years ago, that we are not alone, and that the animals we share this earth with are subjects of their own lives. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.